Can you imagine a scenario like this? You are trapped in a pipe with a diameter just a little bit longer than the width of your shoulders. You can't sit up or make any large movement. You can only move along the length of the pipe. At this moment, you feel quite dizzy and faint because you were just sucked into this pipe by a whirlpool, spun around for a very long time, and your body was battered before you finally came to a stop. One of your legs is already broken, and the intense pain is constantly tormenting you. The most terrifying part is that you discover the pipe is filled with seawater and oil. The pipe is almost horizontal, with some places being rugged. This creates air pockets, just enough for you to stick your mouth and nose above the water to breathe. It's a harrowing situation where every breath is a struggle. Any higher and you will touch the oil-covered inner wall of the pipe. But these precious air pockets only exist in a small section of the pipe. The rest of the pipe is completely filled with seawater. You can only try to stretch your nose and your mouth above the water to breathe. The pungent smell of the oil makes the little bit of air left almost unbearable. In such a situation, you don't know what to do. You don't know where you are in the pipe, and you are not sure if anyone will come to rescue you because the entire pipe is actually beneath the sea surface. You may scream or bang on the pipe so you think you can attract people to come and save you. But it's futile because first of all, you are under the sea, and second, the pipe is absolutely a distance away from the shore. You only know that one end of the pipe is actually open, while the other end is a dead end, completely sealed. You could certainly escape from the open end, but you don't know which direction that is. Is it the direction of your head or your feet? You are even more uncertain about how far you are from the open end. You only know it should not be close, and a considerable part of this distance is filled with seawater. You are unsure how long you will have to hold your breath until you reach the open end. Most importantly, if you choose the wrong direction, are you able to make your way back? It is absolutely a waking nightmare, even just imagining about it. The thought alone is enough to evoke deep fear and sorrow. Hello everyone, my name's Kat. Today I'm going to uncover this suffocating, desperate, and shocking tragedy, the Paria diving incident. The incident took place in Trinidad and Tobago, an island country located in the Caribbean Sea of Central America. This country has very rich oil resources and is one of the most important oil exporters in Caribbean region. In the southwest of Trinidad Island, there is a place called Pointe-à-Pierre, a major port town in the Caribbean region. Here, a company called Land and Marine Construction Services, known as LMCS, is responsible for handling various types of projects. It undertakes business from some very large oil and gas companies. Recently, LMCS took on a large project and signed a long-term cooperation contract with a government-owned oil company, Paria Fuel Trading Company, to help them maintain their underwater oil pipeline system. So what exactly are these oil pipelines used for? When oil tankers come into port, they are often heavily loaded. To prevent grounding, the berths for these tankers are not right at the shore, but a certain distance from the coast, on the water. Therefore, there are many underwater oil pipelines below the berths. Some pipelines directly connect to refineries onshore, allowing the oil to be directly transported to the refineries. Other pipelines enable oil transfer between tanks at different berths. One such pipeline is located between berth 5 and berth 6. This pipeline had been idle for 4 years. With the recent increase in business volume, Paria Fuel Company decided to reactivate this dormant pipeline. So they outsourced the cleaning and repair of the pipeline to LMCS, who was responsible for the implementation. LMCS sent 5 divers to carry out the maintenance work. The divers involved were 36-year-old Christopher Boldram, the sole survivor of the incident, and he's also the only one to recount the entire story. 36-year-old Kazim Ali Jr., 31-year-old Yusuf Henry, 48-year-old Rishi Nagasar, and 57-year-old Faisal Kurban. All 5 were experienced divers. For example, the sole survivor Christopher started deep-sea diving at the age of 20, was certified by the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, and was a seasoned scuba diver. Only senior and experienced divers could execute this challenging pipeline cleaning and maintenance work. On Friday, February 25, 2022, the 5 well-prepared divers gathered at the shore and boarded a boat heading towards berth 6 platform. Berth 6 and berth 5 are 360 meters apart. Below them, there is a 30-inch U-shaped pipeline laid on the seabed at a depth of 16 meters. Normally, both ends of the pipeline should be above the sea surface, allowing the oil to be transferred between ships at different berths. However, this pipeline had been out of use for many years, and the end at berth 6 was actually below the surface and had not been addressed. To reactivate the pipeline, they would need to weld leaks, clean out years of accumulated sludge, and add an extension pipe at berth 6 to raise it above the sea surface for normal use. The equipment used for this task is called a diving bell. It is an 8-foot cubic structure. During operations, the diving bell is placed over the pipeline's opening. The bell forced a pressure on the ocean water inside. The water is then pushed down by the pressure and creates a dry workspace for the maintenance team. Oxygen is supplied to this space through a hose. Once the diving bell is set up, the divers will dive into the water and enter the dry space from the bottom of the bell. This workspace allowed them to take off their diving gear and carry out the essential work. They had completed this procedure hundreds of times and were extremely familiar with the work. These 5 veteran divers must have believed that this time would be like all the previous times, until it wasn't. This type of work procedure should be standardized, typically involving comprehensive and in-depth planning, including risk assessment and close monitoring. This process takes days, if not longer. Whether the company had completed this process is unknown. It's likely that the 5 divers simply followed the orders without giving it much thought. With the help of their colleagues on the boat, the 5 divers descended into the sea, set up the diving bell above the pipeline, and then entered it to begin their work. Throughout the morning, they dismantled the pipeline's sealed door at berth 6 before returning to the boat for lunch. At 2:45 p.m., they resumed work. After donning their diving gear, they jumped into the water from the boat and entered the diving bell one by one from the bottom. Their next task was to remove an inflatable plug inside the pipeline. This plug was installed 2 weeks earlier to form an airtight barrier to protect the oil in the pipeline and prevent contamination. Inside the diving bell, the divers took off their diving gear as the dry space was filled with oxygen. They looked into the pipeline and saw the inflatable plug securely blocking it. To deflate the plug, they needed to open the valve on it, but they realized they had forgotten to bring a wrench with them. One of the divers, Kazim, put his diving gear back on and swam to the surface. He called out to the people on the boat to hand him a wrench. Soon, a person found the wrench and handed it to him. Kazim took it back to the diving bell. When he returned, the other 4 members were trying to open the valve on the inflatable plug. Kazim handed the wrench to his companions, and while they used it, he slowly re-entered the bell and took off his diving gear and put it aside. They used the wrench to loosen the valve so the plug could be released. What they didn't know is that this plug was actually pressurized. At the moment they turned the valve and released the plug, the pressure balance of either side of the plug was disrupted. This loss of the pressure equilibrium set the stage for the ensuing disaster. Without any warning, water rushed into the diving bell in a flash. It formed a relentless and ferocious vortex at the opening of the narrow pipeline, sucking in water, equipment, and of course the crew members. The 5 divers were unable to react in time. In the blink of an eye, they were ruthlessly forced into the pipeline due to the strong suction. Chris recalled that he felt himself spinning uncontrollably before being sucked in. He tried to control his body, but the water flow was too fast. After 90 agonizing seconds of violently spiraling, repeatedly slamming against the inner walls of the pipeline, and struggling for oxygen, they finally came to a stop. Let's look at some snapshots of the footage recorded by the camera carried by Kazim. At this point, his companions opened the valve on the plug, and the immense pressure damaged the camera. Water rushed into the diving bell, and they were swept into the pipeline by the high-speed water flow. For the next 90 seconds, they were carried along by the current. Here, we fast forward to the moment when they stopped.
I trying to come up. Yeah. Yeah. Right behind you, man. All right behind you? You're right behind me? Yeah. You don't know when you're trying to come up? It's not coming up. Who making all that noise? Come on, all that we let's figure it out. We gotta go. We gotta start moving. Yeah. Where you at? I don't know. I'm trying to come up. Trying to come up. Who's that boy? Yusuf? Oh, Yusuf? How long you have to walk before you meet Feisy? You and Feisy was together all the time? Who else with you? Me and Feisy alone. Can't with you? Right there. Right there where? Can't everything alright with you? No. Any limbs break? Oh, your leg, alright. Five. Anything happen to you? Yeah. A five? No way. Yusuf, anything happen to you? Yeah, boy. What happened?
As you can see, at the moment, the camera footage abruptly ended. Due to the uneven seabed, the pipeline was not entirely level. Some elevated sections were not fully submerged in seawater, and several air pockets were formed. The 5 men were momentarily spared in these air pockets. When the 5 men finally regained their consciousness, they found themselves in pitch darkness within the pipeline, unable to see anything. Their bodies were battered and ached all over, and they suffered from suffocation as the oxygen in the air pockets was dangerously scarce. The conditions inside the pipeline were extremely harsh, with thick layers of oil residue accumulated over the years on the walls. The air they breathed was far from pure. It was tainted with disgusting smell of oil, making each breath repulsive. The liquid in the pipeline wasn't just seawater, it was mixed with oil. As Chris recalled, every time he opened his eyes, they were burning. His throat was burning as well. His ears were ringing. His lung was fighting after holding breath for a long time. His body was suffering to pull every bit of air. He said, It was an unbelievable nightmare. The pipeline's diameter was only 30 inches, forcing everyone to lie flat, unable to sit up. Worse still, they had to keep all the time as close to the upper part of the pipe as possible to breathe. In this moment, a terrifying atmosphere enveloped everyone. They all realized the gravity because they were trapped in this 1,200-foot-long oil pipe, which is equivalent to the length of 4 football fields. Among the 5 trapped individuals, the oldest was Faisal, 57 years old, and the youngest was Yusuf, 31 years old. In their moments of near death, they all thought of their families. Chris had 3 children and was the breadwinner of his family. Kazim had a daughter and lived happily with his family of 3. Yusuf had 3 children and chose this high-risk job to support his family, especially after his 2 brothers died in accidents a few years ago. Rishi had a son, and Faisal was a devout Christian who loved the sea and had been working in this field for many years, serving as the leader of the 5. At this moment, although the 5 were not far apart, they couldn't see each other and could only communicate by shouting. After figuring out their positions, they got to know that Chris was at the front, followed by Kazim, Yusuf, Rishi, and Faisal. Kazim was the most seriously injured with a broken leg, making him immobile. The dark environment was terrifying, and Kazim was on the verge of collapse. After some discussion, some thought they had to leave this place quickly, as they would die if they ran out of oxygen. Others believed that the company would know about the accident and would send someone to rescue them. Moving hastily could lead to more danger. Additionally, the pipeline walls were extremely smooth, making every movement difficult and exhausting. However, these were just the theories. No one could guarantee that someone would come to rescue them. The 5 stayed in the pipeline for 20 minutes, and the water level seemed to rise slightly. The oxygen inside the air pockets was about to run out, forcing them to try to escape on their own. The problem was which direction to go. They only knew the order of the 5, but not the direction. Only by going towards berth 6 could they escape. Going towards berth 5, which was sealed, would cost them their lives. In this critical moment, the oldest, Faisal, hesitated. He thought it was too risky and preferred to stay put and wait for rescue, suggesting they could make noise by banging on the pipe to signal they were alive. However, this idea was rejected as the oxygen might not last until rescue arrived. Finally, they decided to move towards Chris' direction, as the majority believed they were sucked in feet first, which means that Chris' direction was the way out. The 5 men began to move. Each one reached out to touch the feet of the person in front of them and linked a chain. Chris led the group, while Faisal, at the rear, pushed forward to keep the chain moving. Moving even a short distance in this slippery and oil-covered pipe was difficult, especially for Kazim, who had a broken leg. He tightly held Chris' leg ahead, with Yusuf pushing from behind. Despite the difficulties, the men moved to the best of their abilities, and their strong will to survive kept them going and raising their heads to brace. Compared to the fear, the physical pain seemed insignificant. Soon, Chris noticed the problem ahead. The next section of the pipe was fully submerged in seawater. He shouted for the others to stop and informed them of the situation. If they would have intended to proceed, they would have had to hold their breaths and dive underwater. However, they didn't know how long the submerged section was, or if they were even going in the right direction. Having worked in the industry for over 10 years, Chris had never encountered such a dangerous situation. For everyone's survival, he intended to take a gamble. Since he was at the front, he offered to scout ahead alone. He promised that if he escaped, he would bring rescuers back for the others. Seeing Chris' determination, Kazim insisted on going with him for mutual support. Chris and Kazim were very close colleagues and friends in reality. Despite his injuries, Kazim was resolute in accompanying Chris. The other three agreed with their plan. If Chris and Kazim made it through the submerged section and confirmed that the berth 6 was the one they were approaching, they would signal their safety by banging on the pipe. Chris and Kazim took a deep breath and dived in, with Chris leading and Kazim holding onto his leg. After a while, Chris began to tire, but the worst was yet to come. They had been holding their breaths for a long time and were close to suffocating. At this critical moment, Chris touched a hard object ahead. Miraculously, it was an air tank. He quickly used it to brace and then pass it to Kazim. This air tank helped them fight their way forward in the darkness until the air ran out. Just as Kazim was near suffocation, Chris found another air tank again, as if fate intervened at precisely the right moments to save them. These allowed them to continue for a while longer. After some time, they reached another air pocket where they stopped and braced heavily. But this pocket was shorter and wouldn't last long. After a brief rest, they banged on the pipe to signal their safety to others. Hearing a response from behind, Chris felt a sudden sense of despair. He realized that they only made it this far because of sheer luck of finding two air tanks along the way. The others absolutely couldn't reach their position without their tanks. Everyone pinned their hopes on Chris and Kazim. Only their escape could bring salvation to the others. Feeling immense pressure, Chris took a deep breath and prepared to move forward. Right at this moment, Kazim broke into sobs, overwhelmed by fear. Chris could do nothing but comfort him. Chris knew he had to move quickly to get help. He decided to leave Kazim behind to wait for rescue, as Kazim was already exhausted and agreed with the plan. Then, Chris pressed on with the air tank, uncertain about whether he was heading in the right direction or not, and how much air remained. After some time, he reached a bend that led to a vertical passage. Adjusting his position, he swam upward with all his strength. This was the moment of truth. As he broke the surface, Chris gasped for air. He finally glimpsed hope as he vaguely saw the opening ahead. Chris was too exhausted to celebrate or even express any emotion, having fought for over 2 hours since being sucked in. And now it was already evening, around 5 p.m. Though he had surfaced, he was still inside the pipeline, with some distance remaining to the top. The walls were sleek with oil. Chris, using his last bit of strength, shouted and banged on the pipe, hoping someone would hear. Suddenly, a chain dropped from above. It was his 2 other colleagues who had been assisting on the boat that morning. With their help, Chris was finally rescued. Meanwhile, Perrier Fuel Company executives, LMCS divers, and Coast Guard arrived. As Chris recalled, after rescued from the pipe, he used his last strength to repeatedly tell the staff and medical team that there were still 4 more alive in the pipeline, urging for rescue. Despite being weak, he refused treatment, insisting on waiting for his colleagues to be saved. The operations manager assured him they would do their best to save the others. Eventually, Chris was beaten by the fatigue and exhaustion. He was taken to the hospital and fell asleep en route. That night at 10 p.m., rescue divers heard banging from the pipeline, but no one entered to rescue. They waited the entire night. On Saturday, Chris awoke in the hospital, surrounded by family and some other colleagues. His first question was about his 4 trapped men, but he only met with silence. After learning the truth, he was devastated. No one had entered the pipeline to rescue them because Perrier Fuel Company didn't allow divers to enter. Media coverage brought attention, and local fishermen attempted a rescue, but the area was sealed off by the company. 3 days later, the company announced they had retrieved 3 bodies and found a GoPro camera. Covered in oil and unrecognizable, DNA tests identified them as Kazim, Yusuf, and Faisal, all drowned. 3 more days passed before the 4th victim, Rishi, was found in the pipeline's oil mixture by an underwater robot. Perrier Fuel Company claimed they made every effort in handling the bodies respectively and promised a thorough investigation. However, they never released an accident report. Chris believed the tragedy was due to the company's lack of rescue efforts and sought justice for his deceased colleagues through protests. Victims' families joined, demanding accountability, holding up posters with the deceased photos in protest. Rishi's wife, in an interview, stated, "Our struggle is real. We have to raise and educate our children. Our home is no longer a home without our family's pillar." Perrier Fuel officials said they made immediate rescue plans, but the pipeline was too narrow for divers with air tanks. Chris disagreed. He was on site at the time, and he knew the rescue resources were available. He also knew the locations of his other colleagues, but no one entered the pipeline for a long time. This incident attracted the attention of the country's authorities, who established an investigative committee to look into the matter. To seek justice for the victims, Chris openly detailed the events at the investigation meeting. Recalling the situation at the time, he couldn't help but shed tears. He stated that the smell inside the pipeline was really awful, and the oil sticking to his face caused a burning sensation all the time. Except for him, the others trapped in the pipeline had always thought that someone was trying to save them, but the reality was despairing. From the beginning, their lives had been abandoned. No matter what, when Chris was rescued, the 4 trapped people were still alive. Although someone heard the knocking sounds from inside the pipeline, no action was taken. After being rescued, Chris lived in fear every day, unable to sleep whenever he thought of the 4 colleagues. Such days were extremely painful, and sometimes he even felt that he shouldn't have survived. He lay in the hospital for several days, feeling deeply guilty, and kept repeating to reporters, "I failed them." Regarding the cause of the accident, some suggested that on the day of the incident, a large vessel might have passed near the berth, creating high-pressure waves that surged into the living quarters. Although this theory is somewhat tenuous, there was a fully loaded oil tanker passing near the scene on the day of the incident. The investigation committee spent $15.5 million to produce a 380-page report, which pointed out that Perrier Fuel Trading Company failed to fulfill its duty of care to the divers, attributing the accident to the company's poor operational procedures. They even refused to let divers go for the rescue. LMCS, the company that was commissioned by Perrier Fuel Trading to carry out the maintenance work, also bears equal responsibility for the disaster's consequences. However, the company may not face criminal charges because it was Perrier Fuel Trading that prevented the company from launching the rescue operation. The investigation committee recommended charges against the Perrier Fuel Trading and LMCS based on the accident report. The Occupational Safety and Health Agency has filed 12 charges against the Perrier Fuel Trading and 3 LMCS executives. The victims' families have also filed civil lawsuits for compensation, but so far, these lawsuits have been shelved with no result. Even if they receive compensation, it cannot make up for the pain caused by the loss of the loved ones. It is worth mentioning that, despite multiple autopsies, there has been no consensus on the time of death of the 4 individuals. What is certain is that all 4 members lived until after Saturday, and some may have survived until Monday. Kazim's family claimed his body, and after returning home, they asked a coroner to re-examine him. The results showed that Kazim might have survived in the pipeline for more than 39 hours. We don't know what they experienced later, or whether they tried to escape on their own. But we can know that the trapped people in the pipeline suffered greatly and must feel hopeless in their final moment. That's the story for today. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe my channel. I will be releasing a new episode every week. I'm Kat. See you next time. Bye bye.